All right, hi again. This is Alberto Olivas. I'm the director of the Congressman Ed Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service here at Arizona State University. And once again, I'm joined by my student helper, Anusha Natrajan. So thank you, Anusha, for helping me with this workshop, this brief presentation on the civic spectrum. So before I get into it, let me give you some context because many of you haven't heard of the phrase civic spectrum before. This was a phrase and a model coined by my mentor, the late Dr. Bernie Ronan, who I worked with for many years in the community college system here, the Maricopa Community Colleges. He did a lot of his doctoral research on civic engagement models. And he and I had a lot of conversations about what we each experienced, both in the nonprofit sector and we also both worked in the state of Arizona for different state agencies. So doing advocacy and public engagement efforts for nonprofit organizations and for government agencies and working with collaborative projects that involve many partners, we saw a lot of things happen, and it resonates for me in terms of working with student leaders as well. How much effort we tend to put into recruiting people to join our cause and to try and get people to care about the issues that we care about. And sometimes it seems like you initially have a lot of success at getting people to pay attention and to care about your issue, but they don't stay engaged. They can drop off after a while, or they will initially commit to, say, volunteer at your activity, but then they don't show up on the day of the event. You're like, what happened? How do we keep people engaged? How do we really work in a way that is more effective at getting people to commit to our causes, to really feel personally invested in the thing that we want them to be involved in? So that's where the civic spectrum is all about, is a new way of looking at how we do civic engagement that hopefully will have better and more long-lasting outcomes in terms of engaging people and keeping them engaged and preparing them to be effective as advocates and as champions for different causes. So that's what we're going to try and accomplish today, is looking at that model. So in this first slide, we have a graphic representation of a more old-fashioned conceptual model for civic engagement. And I don't know, Anusha, if you've seen this before or heard of these concepts in this way, but the traditional or old school model for civic engagement really revolved around the two concepts of raising awareness and increasing involvement. So the thought here, and you'll notice they're linked with these kind of perpetual arrows, is that these two things drive each other. So if I wanted to get Anusha involved in my campaign to reduce child hunger in Arizona, I might start on the left by raising her awareness about that issue. I might say, Anusha, did you know that 4 out of 5 children in Arizona go to bed hungry every night? This, by the way, that's a true fact. I'm not just making that up. It's more like 3 out of 5 in the cities, but out in rural parts of our state, it's 4 out of 5 kids go to bed hungry every night. So that's a true fact. I can educate her about the statistics to increase her awareness about that issue. And by so doing, I make it more likely that Anusha will want to get involved in some way. So she'll say, that's terrible. I had no idea it was that bad. What can I do about it? And then I can say, Anusha, here's this great project to address child hunger for tribal communities. Would you be interested in helping out this weekend in April? And so if she knows that it's a big problem, she's much more likely to say, yes, I'd be happy to go with you to the Navajo Nation to do this event, blah, blah, blah. And as people get involved in working on a cause, they then become even more aware of all the ramifications, the nuance. They'll have their own experiences to inform their awareness, their knowledge about the issue. So let's say Anusha comes with me to the Navajo Nation on April 15th or whatever, and she helps us with educating young parents about nutrition and signing them up for benefits so that they can get some government assistance to buy food for their kids, things like that. by doing that, she'll have learned a lot about resources. She'll have learned a lot about how to talk about the issue, and she's more likely to stay involved. So this old-fashioned model of civic engagement says that if we want to get people committed to a cause and to carry through, we have to do both of these things: educate them about the issue and provide ways for them to get involved. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about the model at this point, Anusha?
No, I just think it's really fascinating because when I was doing all these civic engagement activities, like, I felt like we weren't like taught like, hey, this is what we're supposed to be doing. It was more of like, like actually doing the projects and volunteering work where I was able to learn like, hey, this is how this traditional model of civic engagement functions and works. So like seeing it into context makes a lot more sense, because I was honestly thinking about historical events and movements like the women's suffrage movement, where, they brought an awareness where no woman could vote. And then the involvement was, the protests and marches. So,
Mhm.
I think you can see this throughout history and, how it's been that traditional model in trying to raise awareness about a
Right.
specific cause or issue.
So it's not that this is a bad model for civic engagement. It's just what we came to discover over time is that it's an
Hmm.
incomplete model because it
Exactly.
assumes some things. And so where we're talking about, for example, educational institutions like schools, colleges, and universities, they tend to focus much more on the awareness side, educating people, what facts, what is the current news related to the topic, those kinds of things. And in the non-governmental organization or nonprofit sector, they tend to focus more on involvement. So I'm going to recruit you to donate to my campaign,
Hmm.
or to volunteer, or maybe I'm going to recruit an intern or hire someone to work for me. We just want you to do stuff, but they may oftentimes spend less effort on educating people. And both of those kinds of imbalances are not really helpful, because if I'm just trying to get men to care about and support some change to make things more equitable for women, but I haven't educated them about why it's a big problem, I'm just saying
Exactly.
you should already know, you should know that women are not treated fairly in our society. So you should vote for this initiative on fair pay. But if men aren't really aware that how much of a gap there is in pay, or how much women struggle to be treated equitably in different ways in society, they're not likely to care enough to pay attention or to support the effort. So just in trying to get people involved without doing the awareness piece is oftentimes very unsuccessful and very frustrating. On the other hand, what schools and universities often focus almost predominantly just on the information side. If I'm just educating you about domestic violence statistics, but not telling you how to get involved, it can be profoundly discouraging. And the emotional response can be to just stop paying attention, because why do I want to hear all these horrible things if I can't do anything about it? So we can't just focus on raising awareness, and we can't just focus
Hmm.
on trying to get people to do something. We have to do both, but both of those things still are incomplete, because what we're missing is the third leg of this stool, which is finding ways to attach someone's personal emotional commitment. How do we get them to care and see how they are individually, how they and their family and their communities, the things that matter most to them, are impacted by the issue that we're trying to engage them in. So the heart, really, you could think of this as the engine that drives this whole process. Without that heart attaching, connecting to people at that heart level, none of this is going to be sustainable or ultimately as effective as it could be. So let's get into some specifics and some for instances. So breaking it down, these are the three legs of the civic engagement stool in the civic spectrum model. So when we're talking about the head or information, we're answering the question, what? What is the issue? What is the cause? What is the need? And here's where we focus on presenting facts and information, data, getting people to think through things. And so that's the focus area under the head. And the strategies include notifying people, doing research, presenting research, informing, educating, and so forth. And the outcome, if we do a good job under the head part of Civic Spectrum, is that people come away from our efforts more aware, more informed, more familiar with what's going on. So the young men I deal with will, as a result of my efforts, will be a lot more savvy about how specifically women are treated unfairly in our society. So it's not just some abstract concept. They'll have some real concrete knowledge about what exactly is it like to be a woman in specific industries, or what exactly is the economic impact of being a female in the workplace, those kinds of things. Now let's look at the heart aspect of civic engagement. We're in our heart strategies, we want to answer the question why. Why should we care? Why does this matter? And our focus in those strategies is to create hopefulness and devotion and personal commitment. And vision there is important to think about. We want to create a shared vision of what could be, how things could be different, how things could be better than they are now. So in the heart part, that's really inspiring people. And so those strategies revolve around how do we engage and connect with people in real and legitimate and personal ways? How do we inspire people and not scare them? Because what we found from the research, especially with young people, is they do not respond well to campaigns that are driven by fear and anger. They turn away from those things. They don't pay attention. They're really demotivating, but they are much more likely to vote, to get involved, to take action when they feel inspired and hopeful. So we want strategies that help create an idea of what could be, what is possible. If you, Anusha, help me with this campaign, here's what difference we could make for these kids in this community. Does that make sense? Whereas if my whole focus is on how much these kids suffer and how awful it is for them, it's easy to just not want to pay attention because you feel very discouraged and hopeless. So we want to counter that in the heart strategies by creating inspiration, by creating a vision of what could be by you helping me, by you being involved in the process. And the outcome, if we've done a good job of that, is that people are personally dedicated and committed, and that they have empathy, that they really understand how people are affected and why, back to that question, why they should be involved. Why do I need you to be involved, Anisha? I want you to have clarity about what difference you could make by getting involved in my initiative, my project.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I just wanted to make one point too. I think this is very important, especially for those who are trying to start some sort of project, leading that project. I think it's important to have all these facts come into play and, just kind of, have these things so that it can be more, you're making more of an impact in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the third leg of the civic engagement stool or model is on application, the hands, what to do. So we're answering the question, how? How can I get involved? How can I make a difference? I know about it now. I care about it now. The next thing is, what can I do about it? And so our focus there is on application, taking action. So strategies in this area may oftentimes focus on preparing people to do things. What kind of preparation do they need? Do I need to train you so that you can give speeches to do public awareness raising? Do I need to provide you with talking points? Do I need to work with you to practice fundraising or to practice writing social media campaign messages? Do I need to, maybe we could do a simulation so that you can rehearse whatever it is I want you to do, so you'll feel more confident that you can do it. Before I send you out into the community to do outreach, you can practice having a conversation with me as if I was a parent that you were going to be talking to. I could make sure you had a mentor, maybe someone that's more experienced to work with you and guide you and answer your questions, and just have some guided experience so that you have plenty of opportunities to feel prepared, to be in fact more ready to do the thing I want to ask you to do. So our focus under the hands is what are ways for you to do something about the issue? And that could be service opportunities, it could be outreach, it could be doing awareness raising of your own. So I've provided you with some talking points or some data points now. Anusha, your first task is to post some things on Instagram and TikTok to
Mm-hmm.
raise awareness about the issue. So that's an action I can ask you to take. And I can show you some examples of what other people have done. And we can do maybe a practice session before I set you loose to go visit these houses in this neighborhood that we want to target. Does that make sense? So if
Oh
we
yeah, no.
good, so if I've done a good job on their under the hands category, working with Danusha to show her how she can take action, she's much more likely to get involved and stay involved. And her efforts are more likely to be effective. So she's going to feel like I did a good job with this. I'm proud of what I did, and that makes me want to stay doing this thing. She's going to feel more confident than if I just say, write your senators and tell them the blah, blah, blah. Well, if she's never written a lawmaker before, a lot of times she'll maybe think, well, I don't know how to do that. And I don't want to make the mistake and say the wrong thing. So I want to make sure that she's confident and that she'll do an effective effort behind whatever it is I'm asking her to do. So if we're successful, she'll be confident, she'll be engaged and connected, and she'll be involved and more likely to stay involved. So that's the full model of the civic spectrum. There's a brief document that I'll share with you all in the course shell that goes into a lot more detail about what this looks like, but this is what it breaks down to in its essence. Next, I want to talk about what the dangers are of an incomplete approach to civic engagement that doesn't fully do justice to all three of these steps. But before I do that, do you have any questions or comments you wanted to offer, Anisha?
You know, I just wanted to reiterate the importance of hands-on experiential learning because, you know, we learn stuff from our like leaders, advisors, but it's important to apply what we learn so that we can learn from those mistakes, learn what worked, what didn't. You know, definitely I use my extracurricular experiences as a way to kind of apply what I've been learning both in and out of the classroom and, you know, able to see like what might work and what might not work. And I think that you know, this is like a very foundational piece of, you know, what gets civic engagement going and running in our communities.
Oh, you said something so important there about being able to learn from things that aren't done perfectly or maybe don't go well. So that's like a really critical aspect of the hands-on taking action stage is using those moments of failure or
Yeah.
suboptimal outcomes as really important learning and training opportunities. So we want to not beat down our volunteers or our new employees or whoever, our partners that are trying something for the first time and may get discouraged very easily and say, no, that actually is a great opportunity for us to talk about what you did well and where we can support you so you can do better the next time. So, and maybe I might ask Anusha, like, what would you need in order to feel like you could do this again and do it better? Like, how could I support you? So we want to have those mentoring conversations instead of saying, yeah, that was terrible. I guess I need to find somebody else to do that, to really work with them and say, how can I mentor you? How can I teach you? Maybe you can shadow me when I'm doing it so you can get a better sense for how I want it done or what works well when I'm talking to these single mothers in this community program. What are things I should say or not say? Those kinds of things. So we want to use those experiences because a lot of times we learn the best from when we fail at something and analyze it and try it again with feedback and coaching. As opposed to if we do it right the first time, maybe it was a fluke, but nobody's going to correct us. So we're not really sure what made it work the first time and why didn't it work the second time. So we really want to use those experiences as really important opportunities to do more training and support and coaching and those kinds of things. Okay, so now let's look at the drawbacks of incomplete civic engagement. Because as I mentioned, a lot of times we'll have parts of the strategy that we're really good at or comfortable with, and other parts that we're not as comfortable with. And there's a problem with that. So let's look at the first row where you see head and hands. This represents kind of that original old-fashioned model I was talking about, where our focus is just on informing and trying to recruit people to take action. But if we have not connected to them emotionally, that's where we get apathy. And a lot of times people in our community they wring their hands and get really frustrated. For example, when people aren't voting, they'll say, oh, these young people or this community, XYZ community, they're so apathetic. There's so much apathy. And they treat apathy as if apathy is the problem. But in this model, what we're seeing is that apathy is really a symptom. It's an outcome of other problems. And if we break down the word apathy, its root words mean lacking emotional engagement. So apathy really means no emotional response. And so when people are apathetic, it means that we have failed, not them, we have failed at showing them how the thing that we care about affects them and how it matters to them in a personal way. So there's some reason why they're not reacting emotionally. And sometimes it's just they don't have enough information. But a lot of times apathy is also an emotional response to being overwhelmed. But I'll get back into that. So if I'm trying to recruit Anusha to volunteer at my blood drive, and I'm saying, Anusha, the hospital's blah, 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 shortage of blood, and I need you to help coordinate volunteers at this big event 2 weeks from now. But if she just has never had an experience to where that feels like something that has affected her, or she doesn't really get a sense emotionally for why it matters, especially if it's something we do all the time. You always see blood drive mobiles and vans and things set up all the time. And it's nice. It's not that she's against blood drives. It just doesn't seem that important to her. So if I haven't impressed upon her how dire the situation is and what a difference it makes for people, whether or not there are sufficient blood supplies, then it's really likely that she might initially say, sure, I'll help you with that. But that Saturday in 2 weeks, when her alarm goes off, it might be really easy for her to just go back to sleep. If she doesn't like herself care a whole lot deeply and emotionally. So that's where we see a lot of times people might commit to us to be nice, but if they don't have an emotional attachment to the thing that we're doing, that's where we see a lot of drop off in people that have signed up but don't show up, or people that have pledged to donate to a campaign and then never send in the check. We have missed the boat with regards to their emotional engagement. So apathy comes from that lack of emotional connection. And that's where we need to focus a lot of strategies. Schools oftentimes and universities experience this a lot because we focus so much on informing you and providing you with opportunities to take action. But schools don't like to get into that, like professors, college professors and instructors and administrators can feel uncomfortable talking about the emotional aspects of what we do. But we have to talk emotionally because that's what matters most. Okay, so some examples here. In Arizona, here where we live, voters get to vote on laws every 2 years. We have our state elections. In addition to all the people that get elected to office, there's all these questions that voters are asked to decide to either change laws or create laws or to undo laws. And oftentimes voters are asked to make changes to our state trust land reform process. And every time it fails because not enough people vote for that initiative, either yes or no. And a lot of people just don't understand it. So they vote no because they don't really know what it is. So state trust land reform has not been successful in our state. And it's my philosophy that most people don't even know what it means. So if you don't understand what state trust lands are, or what needs to be reformed, or how it matters, then it's easy to just not care about that on your ballot. There's all these other things and you just skip past it. But if I do a good job of explaining to you, hey, we only have so much land. It's finite. There's not going to be more land that is given to the state to use. And the way that the state uses it is that it's land that the federal government gave Arizona when we became a state, and Arizona can sell chunks of it to raise money for schools and for hospitals and for prisons and things like that. And they can also lease it so that farmers and ranchers and miners can use the land, and they pay the state for the use of that land. And that also goes to fund schools and so forth. So if you are really mad about the state of our schools and you think schools need more money, then you should care about the fact that our current laws don't allow us to use that land very effectively. And there's a lot of wasted money. Then that's more likely to get to that level of emotional, oh, that's why that matters. That's why I care about that. Another example there is the Corporation Commission. Most voters have never heard of it. They don't know what it means. And so every time when we have people that are up for election to the Corporation Commission, very few voters participate on that part of their ballot because they don't know who the people are and what they do. But if I told you, these are the people that determine how much you pay for electricity and for water, and whether or not there's high-speed internet available in your community and what you pay for that, things like that. That's a way to get people to start to care and to pay attention. So I might say, raise your hands if you have a cell phone in your pocket. You should care about who is getting elected to the Arizona Corporation Commission. Do you pay an electric bill? Do you pay a water bill? Do you care where the lines are? All of those kinds of things. But without that knowledge and understanding, if I just say, Anusha, you should vote for the Corporation Commission race, it's important. But that's all I say. It's really likely that Anusha is not going to vote, even if she thinks voting is important, because she doesn't have enough information to care about the outcome. Okay, so enough about head and hands without heart. The other thing that happens sometimes is where we do a good job of informing people and getting them to care, but we don't make it clear what you can do that will make a difference. That's very dangerous, because that is the kind of strategy that can lead to people feeling hopeless. So if I talk about domestic violence and the statistics for women that are killed by their partners and children that witness violence or are subject to violence and abuse and how that affects them for the rest of their lives, I could do a great job of presenting statistics and data. So now Anusha knows how big of a problem this is in Arizona, and she cares a lot about it. And it really affects her. I've shown her these pictures, given her these data. But if I haven't shown her, how can you make a difference for people going in these horrible situations of violence and abuse, then it's likely to just make her feel terrible, make her feel hopeless, and leave her with her sense that there's not really anything she can do about it. And so that discourages involvement, that discourages taking action. So some examples here, Arizona is one of the worst places in our country statistically for human trafficking and sex trafficking of minors. There's a lot of reasons for that. And there are many campaigns in our state around preventing and addressing sex trafficking of minors and human trafficking. But most of those really have done a good job of letting people know this is going on in our community and getting people to care. But very, very little is done in those campaigns to say, what can each of us individually do that will make a difference with human trafficking and sex trafficking of minors? So it's discouraging because I know it's a problem, but I feel like there's nothing I can do about it. Animal abuse is another. We have these commercials on television where they ask you to donate, but I feel like a lot of those commercials are so traumatizing. They show these abused, starving, freezing animals shivering, and it's just such a traumatizing image that yeah, I can maybe give $20 a month, but I'm still left with the sense that what difference is that going to make? There's still going to be all these suffering animals. So the emotional response can be to just turn away. It's too much, it's too painful, I can't deal with it, so I'm just going to make myself numb to that, and that is less likely to get me involved and keep me involved. And then the final thing that can happen sometimes, especially with young people are great at rallying to the cause and getting each other fired up about things. So they're great at the heart strategies of creating urgency and inspiring people to take action, and then saying we should all go protest or demonstrate or we should all boycott this thing. We should all whatever. So the heart and the hands oftentimes come easier to young people. But if they haven't done a good job at the head part, what is the information that is needed, then a lot of times the people will initially get involved and then crash and burn because their efforts were not effective. Because if I go yell at some government officials about this thing that the government is doing, but they're not the right agency, they maybe have no power to make any change about the thing we're mad about. If we're talking to the wrong people, or we're using the wrong strategies, or we don't have our facts straight, then we're not going to be seen as credible or worth paying attention to. And those kinds of experiences can really lead people to feeling like failures. Like, I tried it and it didn't work. I tried it and I was not successful. So that can leave people with the impression that I'm just not, it's me. I'm not a good leader. I'm not good at these kinds of things. So I'm going to step back and let somebody else do it because they might be more successful. So just getting people fired up emotionally and recruiting them to take action without preparing them with the information that they need can lead to failure and burnout and attrition. And so back in the 1990s in Arizona, we had a ballot initiative to make it illegal for schools to provide bilingual education, which Arizona previously used to do a lot of and really led the nation in many very effective models for bilingual ed. But what I was so frustrated by in those days was that a lot of people that were advocating to defend bilingual ed programs were making very emotional arguments to voters and rallying people to donate and to get involved and to sign petitions and those kinds of things. But they were not giving them the factual arguments that would have made a difference for people that were on the line, that weren't convinced whether or not to vote yes or no. They just made emotional arguments that were not effective arguments. And they didn't have a lot of facts and data behind them, which were available, but a lot of people got involved, but they weren't insufficiently prepared and informed, and so they were unsuccessful. And a lot of those people stopped trying to advocate. So that's what we want to not do. We don't want to create apathy, hopelessness, and incompetence, which result from having an incomplete approach to civic engagement. So that's why we need to have a lot of effort and thought put into our efforts to make sure that we're doing a thorough job in all three categories: informing people, engaging them emotionally, and preparing them to take action. If we only do some of or one or two of these things, we're not likely to have an effort that is sustainable or ultimately as effective as it could have been. So that's, in a nutshell, the Civic Spectrum approach to civic engagement. And when I do this workshop live with people in the same space, what I often do then is put them into groups to work on fictional scenarios to say, you know, how would this actually look? What would it look like to use the head, heart, and hands approach to engaging people around a specific issue? So the examples here: elder abuse, outreach, and prevention, which is another big issue in Arizona. We have a lot of people that move here from some other state to retire, and they age in place in Arizona, far from their personal networks and their family members. And as a result, they're much more prone to be the victims of predatory scammers and caregivers and so forth. So there's a lot of elder abuse. So if you were going to be working on that issue, how would you approach that using the head, heart, and hand strategies on that issue? Or opioid addiction for the second example. Or if we're trying to help people that are coming out of prison and trying to reestablish their lives and be successful in the community, how could we help them? So those are the scenarios I sometimes use in this example. We'll provide you with some other opportunities to react to this content and describe what the head, heart, and hands approach might look like in another scenario. But before I do that, let me just see if there's any other thoughts or questions that Anusha might have to offer about any of this.
Yeah, no, I actually did have a question.
Mhm.
I was going to ask, especially for the hands part, what do you think are some good ways to incentivize people to come and be involved, like come and volunteer? Because that's something that I've been struggling with a lot of like clubs and organizations I'm involved in. Like, how can we get those people to be more involved?
Okay, so how do you get them to the hands table? It comes back to the heart. So you have to answer those questions that are bolded under the heart. Why should they care? You need to answer that for them. How are they
Mm-hmm.
affected? And very importantly, what is in it for me? In education, we call this WIFM, WIFM. As educators, we have to think about that WIFM for students. Why should you, Anusha, what's in it for you to attend my class or to attend this workshop or to do this project? What are you going to get out of it? So if I want to recruit you to my effort or whatever, I have to start with those questions and make you understand why you should care, how you're affected, and what's in it for you. So what are you going to get out of doing the thing I want you to do?
Okay.
And that's a legitimate concern because people have many priorities. We're working, maybe we're in school and we're working, maybe we have kids. We've got a lot competing for our time and our attention. So what's in it for me that I should carve out some of my time, maybe just time for me to recuperate and rest on the weekend? Why should I sacrifice some of that time to do your project? Well, because if you care about violence in your community and you want to reduce the violence that's happening. And this violence is going to reduce your property value. So maybe you own a home in this
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood. And if we keep having these crime rates at the rate that they're going, this affects your property value. That's money out of your pocket. And what's in it for you? Well, maybe if you do this thing, this project, you're involved with us, maybe we can give you a certificate of recognition or something that has value for you. Maybe it can be extra credit. If you're in my class and you do this thing, you can get extra credit or an honors credit, or you can be co-published on this research project. So that helps you
Mm-hmm.
professionally or academically. So it behooves us, if we're trying to recruit people to our effort, to think about what can we offer that would be of value to that person? What is valuable for them personally, professionally, academically, etc. Maybe I'd offer to write a letter of recommendation for you that you can just keep and use for other things. Maybe I can create a badge that you can earn if you do at least 4 of these service projects over the semester. You can get a Congressman Ed Pastor service badge that you can add to your curriculum vitae or your online electronic profile or whatever. So how can I make my effort more valuable for you to be a part of? So we shouldn't just count on people wanting to do the good thing as being enough, especially if they don't
Mm-hmm.
see how they are personally affected.
Valued.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so if we're talking about abused kids and Anusha doesn't have any kids, she may feel bad about the abused kids, but it also feels separate from her. Does that make sense? So I have to figure out, how can I get Anusha to feel like hungry kids is something that affects her, and what is in it for her to work on this child hunger program that would be helpful for her to have. And that, like I said, that could be a certificate, it could be a letter, it could be a badge. I don't know. There's many things we could think of creatively. Or maybe she just gets, maybe it's just a simple project on half a day and we feed her. So she doesn't have to worry about spending money on breakfast and lunch. Maybe we can bring someone that would be involved, that someone she wants a chance to meet or at least be around, maybe a local celebrity, or a real celebrity, to be a speaker at the event, that Anusha would say, oh my God, Hassan Minaj is, coming to this thing.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I want to be there. Maybe he'll sign my thing. So there's lots of ways we can think about what's in it for me, but that's the kind of stuff that makes it much more likely that people will follow through and commit. And then you have them at the table and you can help them see how they can make a difference and take specific action. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, no, it most definitely does. Because I'm thinking of like, what are some ways that we can motivate more people to like be involved? It's just because I know I mentioned this in the last presentation that like, especially with COVID, like not a lot of people have been interested. I think they've just been very stressed and drained out from what has just been going on in the world. So just trying to
Mhm.
think of ways on how we can, build back that enthusiasm up, because, they are going to be our future leaders on campus. I'm referring to the younger classes. So
Mhm.
No, definitely agree with that. Yeah, and then I just wanted to make one quick comment too. I just think it's so important that you need to have all three of these pieces because with some of the institutions that I see today, like I just particularly sometimes with government, I see the heart part kind of lost. Like I see the head and hands, like you bring up the Arizona Corporation Commission, and I feel like just sometimes people are just kind of robotically doing the work and not really thinking about the heart and like why are they doing this. It's to try to make a difference in people's lives. So definitely I was reflecting on like the government and how some people like view that, or how they even work for government too can sometimes be draining as well, but not saying that's bad, but just sometimes
It's
that's
just
our issue.
incomplete. Yeah, it makes me think of, I'm so frustrated with so many organizations that are trying to do voter outreach campaigns. What's a good thing? It's
Hmm.
wonderful to try and get more people to vote. But if you're just saying it's important for you to vote, you should vote, it's your responsibility to vote. So we're just kind of lecturing people and judging them if they didn't vote. But if people don't understand how uh, it matters or how their vote makes any difference at all, then they're just not going to have that hope for change being possible. They're not going to have that vision of what a difference their vote could make. So if we're just lecturing people about how to vote, that's the head stuff. And the hands part, you should vote on Tuesday, but we haven't convinced you emotionally that it matters, they're probably not going to vote. So that,
Yeah.
it's important to vote stuff really doesn't make any difference unless I've showed you specifically what um, what on the ballot affects you, how it affects you, and how it affects things that you care deeply about. And a lot of times that's pocketbook stuff. Like if this passes, how will that affect your taxes? If this doesn't pass, how will that affect what schools are able to do? Assuming you care about failing schools, um, maybe you have kids in the schools and you think they're terrible. I need to show you how voting could make a difference for schools. So we can't just say it's important to vote. We have to find ways to talk about voting in ways that are emotionally important, emotionally meaningful for people. So it's a very good point on that.
Exactly.
Any other final thoughts on that?
No, I think that's all I had. I was gonna ask a question about that
Sure.
government component, but I figured it out. I was like, okay, let me frame it in a comment and see like what you thought of it. So yeah, no, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, but like I said, the government agencies and school agencies are often uncomfortable talking emotionally. And that's a problem
Mm.
because without that emotional component, it's not going to resonate with people and they're not going to pay attention and they're not going to be committed. So we have to get comfortable with those emotional conversations and at least bring people into the conversational space of talking about how it matters to them and others. Because without that heart component, we're not going to have sustainable effort. It's just not going to work. So we need all three things, and we need to make sure we're answering these questions that you see here bolded under each category, and that we're really focused on developing good strategies in each of these three areas. So I appreciate your comments and your feedback, Anusha, and for just kind of being there with me as I go through this. We're going to pose some questions for you to respond to on this content. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about how this relates to the work that you are all individually doing in your home countries. And maybe you have some really good examples of what this looks like in efforts that you've been involved with. So thank you for your attention. I hope this was helpful and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Thanks,
Thank
Anisha.
you.